So I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone who's here. My name is Lauren Cox, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies. Welcome to the Obermann Get It Done workshop, Get Concrete About Abstracts. This lunchtime workshop series is designed to help faculty, staff, and students learn specific skills to get things done. And also just a little bit about the Obermann Center. The Obermann Center supports the research of the University of Iowa faculty and students, and we see research as very broadly defined. So now I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today. Professor Hyaeweol Choi is a professor of Korean Studies, Gender, History, and Religious Studies. She holds the C. Maxwell and Elizabeth M. Stanley Family and Korea Foundation Chair in Korean Studies. She's also the founding director of the Korean Studies Research Network and currently serves as DEO of the Department of Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies. And Professor E. Cram is an assistant professor of Communication Studies and Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies. Their expertise includes queer ecologies, queer theory, settler colonialisms, environmental cultural studies, rhetorical criticism, and publicly engaged collaborative scholarship. Both Professor Choi and Professor Cram have served on multiple selection committees, and they will share their expertise today on what makes an exceptional abstract. First, they'll discuss what makes a good abstract, and then we'll open the floor up to questions. You're welcome to put questions in the chat while they speak, and I'll make sure that they're addressed during the Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Choi and Professor Cram. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Obermann Center for inviting us to this really fantastic workshop here. Before I talk about some specific ideas for conference abstract, I'd like to preface this by saying that people have different approaches and preferences. So what I share here is my approach based on my experience working with the grad students and also reading hundreds of abstracts as a conference program committee member, primarily in the fields of Asian studies and gender history. So E and I are going to touch on three elements of writing on abstract. One, intellectual aspect, the second, strategic elements, and then lastly, practical aspects of writing on abstract. So first, this intellectual aspects. So my first question is, are you ready to present something original and substantial? There has been a trend that grad students feel very compelled to present a paper as soon as possible and as often as possible, even when they are not quite ready. To be sure, it's a really important experience to present a paper at a conference, but half-baked paper may do more harm than good in the long run. Also, it depends on the nature and scope of the conference. Is it primarily for grad students? Or is it a regional conference or the annual conference of a major professional society? Or this is a conference based on a specific topic. So for the annual conference of a major professional society, it'd be actually good to consider presenting a paper after you have several chapters of the dissertation. And once you decide to submit an abstract, you may ask, what is the key thought-provoking question that can really excite readers? Does the question contradict what has been assumed? Has the question never been explored? But more importantly, why should you care about the topic and question? It seems to me there's a little bit of a confusion about the importance of a project. A never or underexplored question is not necessarily an important question. There might be some reason why people didn't pay attention to. But as a researcher, you justify why we should care about it. And what are the tentative arguments that will intrigue the readers? Arguments that readers will want to hear more about, and also arguments that can spark lively discussion. So all these elements should be in the abstract key question, but also tentative argument. Okay, so E, would you like to jump in here to add more?
Yes, and I just want to join in my thanks for Lauren and the Obermann Center for this opportunity to talk about abstracts. I always describe abstracts as one of the most important parts of the research process, in part because it's oftentimes the first point of contact between you and an audience. And so the abstract is extremely important. So in building on what Hyaeweol already talked about, other kind of intellectual questions to explore in this process of writing the abstract includes thinking about what ways your specific topic addresses bigger thematic, theoretical, and methodological issues. So I review quite often under the umbrella of communication studies, which includes humanistic approaches, it includes social scientific approaches, and there's also a wide variety of streams in terms of specific kind of intellectual topoi. So American studies, LGBT studies, critical cultural studies. And so each of these kind of divisions have their own kind of norms and customs about, like what kinds of themes are important. For example, citizenship is a really common theme that connects a wide array of people within the umbrella of communication studies. Theoretical issues, right? So like, what are the key debates happening across the theoretical issues that you're exploring or interested in your research? And again, there should be a good reason behind why you want to engage those theoretical debates, right? Is it that people would be really interested in a new novel reading of a major theorist in your field, versus is there a theorist that hasn't been well received that you want to kind of recuperate or something like that, right? There has to be a reason behind why you're asking the questions that you are, to echo what Hyaeweol said. And then methodological issues. What are the kind of key orientations that readers in your field engage around methodology? So this could be anything from new and novel methods to thinking about, like, what does it mean to engage with audiences or topics that are kind of not prioritized within academic research more broadly. So this is a big question happening for people who are interested in, say, like the public humanities, right? So in my field, we oftentimes focus on elite spaces or documents, right? So policymakers, public speakers on the national stage, what have you. But we rarely kind of pay attention to perspectives that are really marginalized or hidden from view in society. And so what does it mean to study or interact with groups who are on the sidelines? And then second, what are the emerging areas of research in your field? I think that one of the most important things you can do as early career people is just to know your field, right? What are the conversations that are happening? Where has the field been, right? So having kind of a map of the field, right? Even if you don't necessarily feel passionate about the history of your field, it's also really important to know why is your field in the moment that it's in? Because then you can really add some context and nuance to those, how you're engaging with emerging areas of research. And figure out, how is your paper kind of related in some sort of way, right? Are you building off of kind of foundational insights? Are you marking, right, something that is taken for granted and needs to be further explored? There's a wide variety of ways that you can think about how to align with, what your field is talking about in our current moment. So that kind of summarizes the intellectual concerns in terms of writing an abstract. So I'm going to throw it back to Hyaeweol to talk about the strategic ways to think about abstract writing.
Great, thank you. I really fully agree with what you has laid out here, all really important points. So in terms of strategic kind of elements in writing an abstract, I would say it's really important to know who the reviewers or program or selection committee members are. They may not be familiar with your specific topic, depending on the nature of a conference. For example, I'm specializing in Korean and East Asian gender history. But when I chair the program committee for the annual conference of the Association for Asian Studies, I had to read hundreds of abstracts covering all regions of Asia, pre-modern, modern, and contemporary periods, and disciplines in a wide range of humanities, social science, arts, environmental science, and diasporic studies. So this is kind of a kind of evolving but really exciting trend in Asian studies. We try to be much more transnational in approach and methodologies. And so we use the term global Asia as a concept, as a method, as a theory. So this is a really wide range. But despite this wide range of specialization and disciplinary diversity, it is always amazing to find that excellent abstracts are characterized by really interesting questions and arguments that are intriguing or even compelling to non-specialists. But these non-specialists are not necessarily ignorant of the field, but they are still able to appreciate the broader significance of the topic and argument because they have been in the field for some years, and they could kind of judge whether this is a new project or a new proposal really advance current communication or current kind of a scholarship here. And Yi, would you like to add something more to this?
Yeah, so building off of what Hyaeweol talked about in terms of audience, I think, I really want to emphasize how crucial this is to know the audience that you're writing for, whether that is a generalist audience to somebody who has great proximity to your work and knows the depth of conversation in a very niche area. To give you an example from my own work, I am a very interdisciplinary scholar. So I, work in communication studies, gender, women's sexuality studies, environmental studies, geography, right? And don't really think about my work as borrowing from these fields, but really to think about through conversation, how stuff becomes possible and rethinking a lot of how we approach some of these questions. But I can tell you that how I speak about my work is going to change depending on the audience that I'm speaking to. So if I'm largely focusing on an environmental humanities audience, I will, think about what kinds of questions or orientations will they be the most responsive to versus a queer studies and queer theory audience, right? So the way that you talk about or frame your work is largely audience dependent and can give you an anchor for where to start based off of the specific needs of that audience. So in your careers, you will write again for a generalist audience. So this is largely very common with grant and fellowship applications. Sometimes, as Hyaeweol talked about, for conference abstracts as well. But those are the folks that, come from a wide variety of disciplines and expertise. If you're writing for a broad disciplinary audience, but again, people who don't share your specific niche, right? They might approach a specific topic different than the ways that you are. For example, emotion is a very popular kind of thematic area of interest in communication studies. And how people engage emotion is going to differ depending on if they're a social scientist versus if they are a humanities scholar. But they share in common this intersection of thinking about emotion and its social and cultural entailments. The reviewer that you will find who is most proximate to your work is largely going to be in the journal review process, where you have, a reviewer selected because ideally they have expertise in whatever topic that you're writing about. And so it's good practice to think about how to adapt to that niche expert, as well as writing about your topic to a very generalized audience. Hyaeweol, do you want to add anything on there?
Thank you. And also, oftentimes, depending on the scope of the conference, but if there is a conference theme with a call for papers in any topic, I would suggest try to relate it to the designated theme. Conference organizers spend a lot of time in choosing a specific theme for the conference because I think it has some urgency or it really has some scholarly merit in pursuing more in detail. So panels and individual papers that address that particular theme tend to have a higher acceptance rate there. But annual conference of the major professional society tend to be kind of a more open, to cover wide the readership and audience there. You may also want to consider whether to organize a panel or submit an individual paper. Naturally, grad students and early career researchers have relatively less network with the scholars in the field in comparison with the senior scholars. But conference organizers often prefer organized panels with a coherent theme among the papers. There are a number of some advantages in organizing a panel. One is an excellent way to network with your current and the future intellectual cohort. And also this kind of some conference presentation could be part of the chapter, could be part of the future journal article with a coherent theme. So it's actually benefit your kind of intellectual pursuit here. And also this might be a little bit kind of minor, but I think it's a kind of important one, so I'm going to mention it. That is the choice of chair and discussant. Again, choosing a chair and discussant is another way to get to know senior scholars in the field and also to introduce your work to them. The chair and discussant can be the same person. I mean, to me personally, this is kind of ideal. But sometimes it is kind of a delicate matter when you ask a very well-known senior scholar to chair only the panel. If they are invited to be the face of the panel just because they are prominent in the field, and also some students might think that putting prominent scholars as a chair give them better chance to be accepted. But I would think twice about that. Some senior members may not like that. I personally don't want to be just a chair of the panel. I want to be engaging in papers and then further discussion. So I would say focus on their expertise and maximize it for the benefit of you and the other presenters. Okay. E, would you like to add something more?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Hyaeweol said about the benefits of submitting a panel. I know as a grad student, one of the most powerful ways that I got to know people in my field was doing this process, reaching out to people that I had met at previous conferences and saying, I'm interested in putting together a panel on this topic. Are you, interested in this? And so I got to know a lot of people through this process and built my network that way. And so, especially if you're interested in an academic position in the long term, building that network early on through the conference process can be really, really powerful. The other thing that I'll add is, again, on the topic of audience adaptation, is to think about what is the function of your abstract. So if you were, for example, thinking of taking the conference abstract that you submitted and it was accepted successfully, and now you're thinking about the next steps. The next steps might be submitting it for publication review in a journal in your field, right? Probably the abstract that you wrote for the conference is not going to meet the needs of a journal abstract. So you want to be thinking about how do I adapt and revise that earlier version of the abstract for the purposes of a journal essay. Also, if you're thinking about taking that conference paper and submitting it to for a fellowship application or a grant application, again, you want to be thinking about your audience. So, for example, what is the mission or the purpose of a fellowship, the granting, entity of that fellowship? For example, is it NEH? ACLS, right? They're going to have different kinds of needs and interests. And so you want to be thinking about who is going to be reading your work and hopefully making a decision about funding your scholarship. And so, yeah, really thinking about adaptation and alignment, I think, are two really rhetorical and strategic ways that you can guarantee your success in this submission process. So we also want to talk about some practical tips on conference submission and abstract submission. So Hyaeweol, do you want to take us over there?
Okay, sure. And I think in some sense, I cannot stress this enough. There should be no jargon, no grammatical or spelling errors. When reviewers read hundreds of abstracts, they can be annoyed by jargon or some pretentious phrases. So try to be very precise and use language that is easy to communicate. And again, going back to all your point, reviewers are not necessarily specializing in your own specific topic or theme. So it is really important to convey your main argument and main topic as effectively as possible by using precise words here. And also each conference or other workshops, they have a very specific guidelines. Try to follow all the guidelines. For example, word limit. Now, word or character limits are not suggestions, it's a requirement. So the reason why we put these limits, because there are some printing budget issues, but also a lot of reviewers spend their time and energy in reviewing those proposals. There is a lot of academic labor involved here. So try to comply with the word limit provided by the conference. And sometimes going over the word limit could mean a rejection too. There may be other required information, such as keywords. Make sure you provide all those keywords and other priorities for example, for panelist diversity in terms of gender, race, academic rank, and institution. If you organize a panel with colleagues in the same department from the same university, that could look pretty bad. And now a lot of professional societies are very much keen to bring in diversity to their academic community. So that diversifying all these criteria is going to be very important and give you a better chance to be accepted. So try to follow all guidelines. Now, guidelines is interesting. Some people do not really read it carefully, but especially the chair or conference organizer should be really careful and cautious in following those guidelines. Okay, so you could add more.
Yes, so absolutely read the directions, follow the directions. It's the first step in getting your abstract submitted. That said, in my own experience, I've written abstracts that range anywhere from 100 words to 500 words. So you can think about, having a short and a long version of, say, like a dissertation abstract, right? So the shorter version absolutely has to give a sense of what is the thing that you're intervening in terms of your research? So is there a taken for granted assumption that you're trying to break? Are you trying to reorient a conversation from elite discourses to vernacular discourses? Those are simply examples. And then you want to absolutely make sure that you have an argument in that abstract, and you give us a sense of, why is this important? Is it going to change the way that we talk about, whatever topic that you're trying to intervene in? And as you shift from, say like the 100-word abstract to the longer abstract, you can go more into the weeds in terms of tracing the debates that are animating the research that you're doing. You can talk more about method. You can talk more about particular texts that you're studying or field sites, what have you. So think about it as moving from the absolutes that you need to have to a more expansive, in-depth description of your project. You also, I really want to stress this, you also really want to know, again, knowing your field, know who is writing on your topic. You don't have to engage with everyone in the world who's ever written about the topic that you're writing about, but you really want to be sure that you know the people in your primary field who are writing on the topic that you are, because they are more than likely to be reviewers of your work. And so you want to make sure that you do your homework before submitting an abstract. I think, Hyaeweol, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add just a couple of minor or not major. So another kind of requirement could be some conferences allow you to submit only one proposal rather than 2 or 3. So make sure what are the kind of the policies at this conference you are applying to submitting your proposals. But our final point will be submit your proposal before the deadline. Nowadays, everything is kind of online. Online submission is a norm. But there may be some kind of technical difficulties, as many people tend to submit their proposal on the last day. So it's really best to plan to submit early, at least a week earlier than. Otherwise, there is kind of a little bit of a risk. I have some experience like that, from those who submit, but it was not when it didn't go through. So they came back after deadline and appeal to reconsideration, etc. But we are dealing with like hundreds and hundreds of proposals, and we cannot really make an exception to those cases. So just be on time. So I think this is kind of wrap up our presentation, and I think Yi and I are just so happy to entertain your questions or any comments. Maybe we could just open the floor to get some feedback, comments, questions.
So we already have 2 questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask the first one from Bianca asking, is being under a word limit an issue? How much under becomes significant?
That's a good question. Under is not a problem. Under the word limit is not a kind of a problem, but whether the under word limit still include all these essential component of the abstract, key question, some of the evidences or some tentative argument, all these essential components should be still there, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the only time that I've experienced it being an issue is if your abstract isn't developed enough. And so that's less of a, like, if you're, 20 words under or something like that. So it's really that in order to be accepted, your reviewer should know, have a pretty good idea, even though, the most generous of reviewers will realize that a conference abstract, even a conference presentation, is representative of a work in progress. It's not going to be the final thing that you have to say about that.
Right.
Okay, thank you. So we have another one from Bianca asking, how close do you keep to the sequence of items the call for proposal outlines? For example, a common order for papers is goals, objectives, significance, theoretical framework, research questions, methods, findings, discussions. Do abstracts follow that format?
Yi, would you like to go first?
Sure. I oftentimes, there's definitely a formula that people use, and probably the best suggestion that I have is to kind of read critically abstracts that are in your field's journals or even the conference programs, because it'll give you a sense of what the norms are within your particular field. I think sometimes this can be a field specific kind of question. That said, my preference is moving from a place of simplicity to complication. So think about it as you're kind of like traveling through sentences, and you're introducing a problem that you're trying to intervene in, and then you want to tell the reader what are you going to study. For example, in communication studies, a lot of people use case study approaches as a way to intervene in things. So the problem, the question that it raises, especially related to a theoretical framework, to what are you going to engage, what's the substance of the paper, and then kind of a sentence about why that matters. What does it teach us about that object or about the conversation that's happening in the field? But I think that could be largely be a humanities oriented approach. But I think there's a formula, but also make sure you know what's going on in your discipline.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with the E. And as a reviewer, I find the first sentence really critical.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first sentence really gets your attention. That is a really good sign. If the first sentence is kind of confusing, it is hard to follow, then it kind of raises a red flag. But also just remember, this is a kind of a narrative. What's the best way to convey your research, so that rather than kind of fixated order, you could figure out also different projects might require different kinds of order in some sense. So I would say as a reviewer, I always kind of pay attention to the first couple of sentences, how you grab the attention, what intrigue readers' kind of a curiosity. And then the last question is also very important one. That will leave the impression that, yeah, I want to read more about it. I want to hear more about this ongoing project and etc. So yeah, so kind of take it as a kind of a narrative or even some storytelling, how to do more effectively.
Hey, thank you. So we have another one from Anonymous. Do you have any specific advice for dissertation abstracts?
Well,
Hyaeweol, do you want to start?
it has been such a long time ago. But dissertation tend to be really long. Again, in different fields, they have a different regulations, I guess, but very long. So, like abstract for the conference or journal article, or people go to abstract first. So this is in some sense the window to your more elaborate, sophisticated research studies. Therefore, I mean, the significance of abstract of the dissertation is going to be just incredible. And again, how to frame your question in relation to the existing scholarship, but also make sure how you advance the existing scholarship. After all, dissertation is really about originality. So what is that originality come from? So to me, it's kind of similar to what we write abstract for other conference or journal or book. I mean, think of it as a kind of a communication and kind of put that order. But I think, again, the beginning is just our first paragraph is always the key. They really guide the readers to be prepared what to expect. And that's kind of my general advice.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. And not to be mean-spirited, but about pet peeves. So one of my pet peeves when I read abstracts is overly Latinate language. So using utilize instead of use, or leaning heavily into passive verbs. And I really appreciate lively writing with great verbs. It's like a mini writing sample as well as the content. But I wonder, it's probably helpful for folks to know what you find off-putting as well as what succeeds in an abstract.
Excellent point. Yeah, you go ahead and I could jump in later.
Yeah, I'm in a riff because I'm still kind of thinking. I mean, I think this is ironic for me to say because I am a very theory-oriented writer, but jargon in an abstract, I think, is one of the things, especially if it's if I'm reviewing something that I feel less proximity to, where it's very clear that the author knows what they're doing, but they haven't really thought about the audience's needs in terms of reading their abstract. So if it's a chain of, critical theory terms, right, but it has no context, or, larger significance of just something that I can grasp on, then I think that's one of the things that I struggle with as a reviewer. I think another pet peeve of mine is, abstracts that are exciting to me for a lot of different reasons, but also there's very clear non-engagement with people writing about the same topic in your field. So this is one of the perils of doing interdisciplinary work is kind of a hunger to engage with people outside of your field, but kind of not engaging with the people who have really been working on that topic for a long period of time. And so being sure that you've done your homework prior to writing an abstract, I think is really important for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if I could just add one more thing here is if, for example, you are very theory oriented, but your writing is absolutely wonderful to engage as someone who come from different field. So theory oriented writing is not necessarily very cumbersome and cumbersome to read. There are ways to do that because I think they know intimately theories and they know what they are actually kind of focusing on, etc. And I found cumbersome writing from those who may not fully understand theories actually, and they don't quite understand how to relate theory to the specific topics and themes and etc. So, but as we know, in research project, in any research studies, we engage in some level of theoretical frameworks, but how to articulate it in a sensible, communicative way, that is the art. That takes a lifetime to develop further. But my work is very historically contextualized and historically specific, so that I personally prefer very precise, simple language rather than flowery or very, I use a term earlier, pretentious words, because I think that could actually disorient readers rather than really help them understand and guide them to follow my point. And storytelling to me, is a wonderful way to engage with the readers because everybody loves stories or anecdotes. Of course, in abstract, you cannot use abstract kind of easily because of the word limit. But I think I like to echo what Teresa pointed out. Use of language, use of words carefully. Always remember who is reading. It's not just for your own self-satisfaction, but it's for the reader. And I don't know whether, since right now there is no question, so can I just add one kind of a really example I love to quote? C. Wright Mills, who is American sociologist in 1960s, he wrote a book, sociological. Oh my God, what was that? It has been such a long time. Sociological Imagination, I think. But actually, he quote Tycho Parsons, another prominent UC Berkeley sociologist. So C. Wright Mills basically took one paragraph, which is like an entire page, and summarized it in one sentence. So in other words, a lot of some kind of very cumbersome sentences or kind of paragraph could be summarized in one simple sentence. So our goal as an intellectual, as a researcher, is to share our original research, how to share, to communicate more effectively with our readers and then audience. So that element should be really kind of a big part of our writing practice.
And I just want to dovetail what Hyaeweol is talking about, because, the art of translation, I think, is what she's really getting at, right? So we have to translate our research all the time. That's the idea of audience adaptation. So I give the advice to, record yourself talking about your project and acting as if you're teaching your project to undergraduates, right? So anywhere from, like an undergraduate in an advanced seminar in your field, in your department, to maybe like a general kind of undergraduate audience, right? And thinking about how you would teach that also changes, right? How you translate what you think is taken for granted knowledge with a particular audience versus what you really feel like you have to explain. So that could be a kind of process that you adapt in order to, right, move from a really complicated, elongated, multi-year project like a dissertation into something that is, 100 words or maybe even 50 words. I think that 50 words was the length for my own dissertation, which was, an exercise in really like figuring out what to prioritize. So translation is a really, really important skill.
And also in academic career, you will have an opportunity to introduce or share your research interest in 1 minute, for example, or for 30 seconds. What would you say? How effectively you convey your research with the most impact. Elevator conversation, for example, at a conference, you ran into someone and you wanted to introduce. How do you say that? You don't have much time. So this kind of some kind of figuring out some strategy how to communicate is going to be really important. In terms of communication, presentation at conference is another kind of element. You might write a beautiful paper, but how to convey your finding at a conference given very limited time, typically 15 to 20 minutes. And I personally prepare two sets of things. One is a full paper that is given to the discussant, but also I prepare a separate presentation paper, which will be definitely finished within 15 minutes. But also anyone in the audience who may not know my work or my topic could still readily understand. So like a plain language is a crucial there. So I think at a conference, those who just read from their full paper with a little bit of complicated, argument and theoretical layout, it could actually distract audience getting the point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, it's impossible to take like a 20-page paper and present all of that within the span of 10 to 15 minutes. And so you really want to think about what is the place that I want to focus on to begin with, right? And say to the audience, in this project, one of the problems that I'm working through is yada, 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 right? What I'm really going to focus on today is sharing some of the people that I'm talking to, for example, if maybe you're doing oral history, and then ending with kind of the trajectory of your research. So this is also a really savvy way to think about, building networks at conferences where, you kind of give like a brochure to your research more broadly within the conference presentation. And so it's kind of an invitation for people to approach you after the panel is over and say, hey, I was really interested in what you're talking about, and I'd love to talk more, maybe collaborate in the future on something. So you can think about building relationships that way as well.
I actually had a question, unless, Hyaeweol, were you wanting to jump in?
Go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering what your thoughts were about reusing abstracts for different conferences, or how much you should change an abstract when you're doing that, kind of what the etiquette is around abstract iteration or reusing them for different contexts.
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
For me, I mentioned earlier that, like a conference abstract ideally is representative of a work in progress. So, in my field, I might want to have a presentation that is, maybe it's based off of a chapter that I'm writing in a larger book. I know that like I can't present everything about that chapter in one conference presentation. So maybe I will, because I'm, writing about method, I want to have something that's focused on method. If I want to focus on a theme that's coming up with an outdoor group that uses Instagram to share their, perspective, maybe I really want to focus on that for a presentation, versus like a different part of the chapter. So for me, I do feel kind of ucky about, like reusing the same thing. And I also understand why people would feel that's desirable, but I think that you can, ideally like think about different chunks that you could use from like a chapter or something like that to really go in depth on a particular angle in that project.
I totally agree. In fact, repeating the same abstract or repeating the same presentation again doesn't look really good. After all, this is the field of certain academic society, and people may actually already heard how you present at a conference and came here and like exactly the same thing. That doesn't look good. But again, in any conference paper and presentation, we're talking about some bigger project and very concrete aspect of a particular theme or chapters and etc. So you could always tweak. I mean, you have a bigger project, but there are a number of areas you could highlight in different conferences or meetings. It could be key concept you articulate or some specific case studies. Even interview data I collect for my research, current research. And I realized, presenting in one of the theme-based workshop and some journal article, I cannot use all of the rich interview data. I kind of change a different theme and angle. And so I could actually deliver quite different kind of presentation, although it's kind of within the bigger umbrella of a certain topic here.
Great, thank you.
One other question I had is you both mentioned earlier that especially for early career scholars or for graduate students, that putting together a conference panel presentation could be one way to do that. And so I guess there's several questions that might be helpful to people around the panel, the differences between your individual abstract versus the panel. And so I wonder, again, for people who are kind of getting started, what do you recommend for reaching out to a senior scholar to invite them to be on your panel, or 2 or 3 or a mixture of different, ranks? That would be one question. And then the other is, I know this varies by conference, but what does a panel abstract look like that might be different from a personal individual abstract in your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So should I jump in first?
Sure.
Okay. So this is a really excellent question, especially for grad students and even early career researchers might consider this kind of process. Approaching senior scholars or approaching potential panelists or chairs and discussants, this is a kind of the beginning of the professionalization in the field. And so I think it's really important to have some kind of general idea, if not the final version of the panel. At least what is a specific topic, what is a tentative abstract we already have, who are the participants so far who confirmed to participate. And this type of some concrete outline is going to be really helpful for senior members who got invited, whether they could just join the panel or not. Those who say, oh, we are interested in this topic and would you be interested in, then there is no really basis to evaluate whether this is going to be good fit for my expertise and etc. And also, at least in my field, panel abstract is different from individual paper abstract. So every panel has a panel's abstract that bring all these individual papers together, but also they are also required to provide individual participants abstract. And again, a coherent theme that binds all these presentations together is really key, rather than kind of scattered and they don't really meet the basic premise of the title, for example, what they're going to talk about. And finding this coherent theme is challenging sometimes, but I think that is a kind of a good exercise for them to do that. But nowadays, actually, grad students have become very sophisticated, very professional, and I have been really impressed by the way they approach senior scholars and asking for this and that, as I mentioned. And also another thing is find the right kind of a scholar because of their based on their expertise rather than just a sheer reputation. And I think I would actually welcome a proposal if they engage in similar kinds of topics and research questions. I'm very much interested in, because that way I could contribute to more to the panel rather than just using my name or not that. But yeah, so I think just identifying the right scholar is already kind of first test. Who could be the best person? Another side element is senior scholars have some kind of obligation to introduce their own grad students to the field by taking some to the annual conference together. So to me, this is kind of mentoring process. But if their mentors are not available, then just reach out senior scholars. And if senior scholars say no, don't be don't be offended. I mean, people get so many, have a lot of demands, but just keep going and then go to the next person. And you will always find people who are willing and enthusiastic about being part of your panel.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. In terms of first contact, giving as much information about what you're planning to do at the conference is the best, because it gives the person a really clear idea of what you're asking of them. So making that really specific on, here's how I'm going to be using my time in terms of both preparing for the panel as well as participating in the panel itself. Very, very helpful. In terms of thinking about panel abstracts, so in my field, there are two kind of versions. One is becoming more popular. It's like a roundtable or a discussion panel. And so that one has less of an individual obligation attached to it, where it's some larger theme. People have, maybe 5 minutes to share their thoughts on the topic and how their research might be engaging in it. And then it's largely more of an open conversation between the panelists and the audience members. We also have, kind of traditional panel presentations where somebody would be writing an individual abstract and then submitting that. And then there's a panel abstract. And again, to echo Hyaeweol, it needs to be really clearly connected. There should be a thread that connects all of the papers within that one panel.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a late breaking question. If you propose a panel or symposium, do you also invite or select the chair, or do the conference organizers have a say in who is the chair or discussant?
At least in my field, you decide, you choose your own chair and discussant.
Yeah, in my fields, it depends on the conference, but typically a chair is required when you submit a panel through the system of reviewing. But oftentimes people will get assigned if you don't have one selected. So you don't necessarily. We also use respondents, which I think kind of parallels the language of discussant. So a respondent is ideal of that senior scholar in the field who's maybe an expert on your topic, and it's ideal for you to hear what they think about the work that you're doing, right? It's a way that you can get feedback, but it's good to just be familiar with the norms of the conference that you're submitting to.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking with that is maybe at grad conferences, it might be a little different, where I've been to grad conferences where they have a respondent for the panel that I was put on for my paper. That's usually a grad student from that institution who will be a respondent. I've seen that happen. So that might be a case where that could happen.
Yeah. If it is an organized panel, the organizer have a freedom to invite specific chair and discussant. But in the case of individual papers, let's say I submit an individual paper, and then conference committee organize 4 different individual papers put together as a panel. Then the conference decide who's going to be chair of the panel, kind of things. So there's a lot of freedom. But also, if you are not quite sure whom to invite, just ask your mentors or your colleagues, brainstorming. Just think of it as a kind of open, enjoyable process. You get to know more people in the process. Yeah.
And on that, I'd mention, don't feel shy about asking your mentors, your group of mentors, to introduce you to somebody. If there's somebody that you feel like you want to be in conversation with, and you're not feeling great about making that first contact, right? Sometimes people can be really intimidating in our minds. It's always an okay thing to ask your advisor or other mentors if they would introduce you to somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions appear in the chat, we're getting very close to our time. So I was just giving 1 second to see if anyone submitted anything, but I don't think that's going to happen. But thank you both so much. Round of applause for you two. And thank you all for coming in the audience, and we hope to see you at the next Get It Done workshop. So thank you all.
And also the participants, those who attended, if you have any further questions, always feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to answer further, further things here, questions you have.
All right. Well, thank you for that generous offer.
Thank you.